it is about rest and relaxation. So, okay, thanks everybody for being here. I'm going to read from my short story collection called Homesick for Another World. And the story I'm going to read maybe half of it. We'll see how far I get in the time allotted. And the name of the story is Malibu. Malibu. In order to collect unemployment benefits, I had to fill out this log of all the jobs I had applied for. But I wasn't applying for any jobs. So I just wrote down lawyer and made up a phone number. Then I wrote down lawyer's assistant and put down the same phone number. I went on like that, law firm janitor. I looked at the number I'd made up. I tried calling it. It rang and rang. Then a woman got on the line. "Who's this?" is how she answered the phone. "I'm doing a study," I said. "How do you feel about people seeing you naked?" "I was a nude model for an art school," she said, "so I have no problem." She said her name was Terry and that she lived out in Lone Pine with her mother, who had Parkinson's. She said she wanted to get pregnant so she'd have something to think about all day. Shit. "I'm an Indian," she said next. "Chumash. What are you?" "I'm regular," I told her. "Good. I like regular men. I wish I wasn't an Indian. I wish I was black or Chinese or something." "Well," she said, "how about you come out here and we see what we can do? I'm not after your money, if that's what you're thinking. I get checks in the mail all the time." It sounded like a vulture was squawking in the background. I thought for a minute. "One thing," I said, "I have pimples and a rash all over my body, and my teeth aren't great either." "I'm not expecting much," she said. "Besides, I don't like perfect-looking men. They make me feel like trash, and they're boring." "Sounds good," I said. We made a date for dinner the next day. I had a good feeling about it. It was true, I had pimples, but I was still good-looking. Girls liked me. This is a male narrator, by the way. You couldn't tell. It's always you never know. I mean, like, should I say that up front or what? But anyway, I think you figured it out, and I just told you on top of that. It was true. I had pimples, but I was still good-looking. Girls liked me. I rarely liked them back. If they asked me what I did for fun, I told them lies, saying I jet skied or went to casinos. The truth was that I didn't know how to have fun. I wasn't interested in fun. I spent most of my time looking in the mirror or walking to the corner store for cups of coffee. I had a thing about coffee. It was pretty much all I drank. That and diet ginger ale. Sometimes I stuck my finger down my throat. Plus, I was always picking at my pimples. I covered the marks they made with Girls Liquid Foundation, which I stole from Walgreens. The shade I used was called Classic Tan. I guess those were my only secrets. My uncle lived out in Agora Hills. I called him sometimes out of desperation, but he only ever wanted to talk about girls. "I don't like anybody right now," I told him over the phone. I was looking in the mirror over the bathroom sink, doing some one-handed picking. "But women are good," he said. "They're like a good meal." "I can't afford a good meal," I said back to him. "Anyway, I go for quantity over quality." He told me to go ask if Sears or TJ Maxx was hiring or Burger King. For someone else, maybe that was fine advice. He himself didn't need to work. He was on disability for having a gimp leg. Also, he had a colostomy bag he didn't care for properly. He used a lot of peach-scented air freshener around the house to cover the smell. He rarely left the living room and liked to order in large Mexican dinners or whole pizzas. He was always eating something and dumping out the colostomy bag right afterward. Sorry. I don't feel very well, I told him, maybe in sympathy with you. I'm too sick to find a job. Go to a doctor, he said. Look in the phone book. Don't be a fool. You need to care for your health. Can I borrow some money? I asked him. No. I found a cheap doctor in a Korean shopping mall on Wilshire. The mall was basically empty, just a lot of fake brass and cloudy windows and orange fake marble floors. I looked up into the Galleria. The glass ceiling was cracked all over. A pigeon soared around, then rested on a strand of unlit Christmas lights. Someone had spread newspapers around the floor. There was a luggage store, a place to get your photo taken, a hair salon. That was it. All the other stalls were empty. A homeless Korean lady padded by me in dirty, quilted long underwear, pushing a baby carriage full of trash. I found the clinic in a dim hallway of unmarked offices. On the door, there was a poster of all the services the doctor offered. I found my symptoms: weight gain, hair loss, rash. I went inside. A fat lady stood at the counter in front of the receptionist. This prescription is for the yellow kind, and I need the pink kind, the Percodans, she was saying. I had a thing about fat people. It was the same thing I had about skinny people. I hated their guts. After a few minutes, a nurse told me to follow her through the office. We passed an unframed poster of hot rods and another poster of kittens inside a top hat. The nurse pointed to a man in a flannel shirt holding a yellow legal pad. He resembled a retired WWF wrestler. His eyes hid behind folds of skin and raised moles and eyebrows badly in need of plucking. He needed a shave, too. Most men have no idea how to groom themselves. From where his shirt puckered between the buttons, I could tell he wasn't wearing anything under the flannel. Wiry black hairs lay across his gut. He smelled like old food. "Are you a real doctor?" I asked him. He steered me onto a greasy examination table. "So you've got something wrong with you," he said, looking at the form. "I try to throw up all the food I eat, but I'm still fat," I said. "And the rash." I pulled up my sleeve. The doctor took a step back. "You ever wash your sheets?" "Yes," I lied. "So what's wrong with me?" "I'm not one to judge," he said, placing his hand over his heart. As good-looking as I was scared nobody would ever marry me. I had small hands. They were like a girl's hands, but with hair. That's so mean. Okay. Nobody marries men with hands like that. When I fit my fingers down my throat, it's easy. My fingers are thin, soft. When I put them down there, it's like a cool breeze. That's the best way I can explain it. "Uncle," I said on the phone, "can I do some laundry at your place?" "Sure," he replied. "Come on over, but bring your own laundry detergent and some Diet Coke." My uncle lived off the 101. I stopped at Albertsons for the detergent and the Diet Coke. I also bought a cheesecake and a carrot cake. I used my EBT card. I never had any shame about that damn EBT card. I got a large coffee and some cigarettes from the gas station next door, too. I didn't really smoke. I just lit the cigarettes and carried them around my uncle's house. It covered the smell decently. "Look at my boy," hollered my uncle, wobbling up out of his recliner. He had a pair of spruce green leather recliners about a foot away from a gigantic television. It was the kind of television they put in hotel lobbies. All he did was watch TV or talk on the phone or eat. He loved game shows and cooking shows. I'm not saying he was an idiot. He was just like me. Anything good made him want to die. That's a characteristic some smart people have. Hi, I said. My uncle's robe was hanging open. I could see that damn colostomy bag. Tell me, he said, as I took out the cakes, you seeing anybody these days? Maybe, but I don't want to jinx it, I said. I don't want to talk about it. You always let me down. We sat in the recliners. I ate the cheesecake and my uncle ate the carrot cake. We watched the end of a movie called While You Were Sleeping. My uncle emptied his colostomy bag, and then I sent that cheesecake down the toilet. I put the laundry in, I drank some coffee, and went back to the toilet. When I was done, I picked up my uncle's razor and shaved the hair off my knuckles. I showed my knuckles to my uncle. Somebody should rub my feet with those hands, but not you, he said. I sat down, sniffed the air, and lit a cigarette. I'm still not feeling well, I said, and I'm broke. I won't give you any money, he answered, but if you cut the grass, I'll pay you for your time. How much time? $20 worth? I'll consider your offer and get back to you, I said. My uncle liked official talk like that. Looking forward to it, he replied. Then he reached under his robe and shuffled the bag around. My eyes rolled. We watched Law and Order, then Oprah, then Days of Our Lives. I cut the grass. I'd gone out on dates before. Nothing really spectacular ever happened. One girl had been a nun when she was younger. I liked her, but she was always talking about herself. It was like she was waiting for something in my face to light up, and nothing ever did. I am not a character in a television show, I explained. All I want to do is see your naked body, then reevaluate. She followed me to the restroom. We were at an Asian bistro in Century City. The bathroom was polished concrete. The lighting was cold and dim. She revealed herself one half at a time, first the shirt off, then back on, then the skirt down, then back up. We dated for a few weeks, just heavy petting, nothing in and out. Finally, I lied and told her I had contracted cat scratch fever from a neighbor's kitten and needed time to recover, alone. She stopped calling, eventually. Only once did I pick up a prostitute. I found her sitting on the curb outside the Super 8 near Little Armenia. She had a clear plastic bag for her belongings, a small makeup case, a pair of running shoes, 2 bananas, and a plastic flower. How do I seem to you? I asked her up in the motel room. How do I smell? You smell like air freshener, she said. You smell like nothing. Great, I said. I took off my shirt. Am I fat? I asked her. She squinted her eyes and smushed her lips together. You're not skinny, and you're not fat, she said. The way she pointed her finger reminded me of my high school principal. Does my face look swollen? I asked her. What do you mean? She said. She pulled a banana out of her plastic bag and started to peel it. Can you see my pimples from there? I asked. She was sitting on the linty bedspread. I went and stood by the window. Yeah, anybody can, she said. I took a few steps away into the shade. How about now? I could still see them, she said. I drew the blinds and asked again. She nodded. Then I sat down next to her and splayed my hands out on the bed. What do you think about these? I asked. Nobody ever gave me the answer I wanted. Nobody ever said, oh, so beautiful. Okay, I think I'm going to stop there. Thank you.
This novel, House of Names, is set in ancient Greece. It's really what happened was that I didn't know a play, which is a late play, it's by Euripides, called Iphigenia in Aulis. I wonder if the title had been better, I would have read it earlier, if it had been called something like Electra. I might have sort of thought I needed to read it, but Iphigenia in Aulis, and there's another one called Iphigenia in Taurus, and I think a lot of people haven't read them. They just seemed significantly unread. But it's important because really at the end of his life, Euripides worked out that Clytemnestra had been getting a very bad press, that in the various versions of Electra, it's her daughter who really holds the middle of the stage and the best actresses play the part. Clytemnestra just comes on regularly and gets sort of shut down by her daughter. Her daughter blames her because she murdered her husband, Agamemnon, and Electra thinks she shouldn't have done this. And Electra is waiting for her brother, Orestes, to come back from wherever he's been so she can egg her brother on to murder her mother, Clytemnestra. And the audience really is on her side by this time because Clytemnestra has taken a lover called Aegisthus, who doesn't have any good lines, ever. But obviously Euripides was worried about this, and before he died he wanted to rectify it, and he really wanted to show that at the beginning of the Trojan Wars, I'm not going to go into the detail of why they happened, but Helen of Troy was involved. But that Agamemnon wanted the winds to change, and the oracle told him the only way the winds can change is if you sacrifice your daughter Iphigenia. The problem was how to get Iphigenia to where he wanted her, and so he told his wife Clytemnestra, "We have found a husband for her, the warrior Achilles, and it's going to be a wedding. And so bring your daughter and bring Orestes and bring a lot of wedding clothes, and we're going to have a great time." And he lured her, he fooled her, and she arrived, and he didn't even have the courage to tell her what he had in mind, that there was going to be a sacrifice, no wedding. And she retaliated. She just waited and thought, if you ever come back victorious from those wars of yours, I'm going to murder you. And so that really in that play you can see why she thought that he really had not had the courage to tell her, but had all of the cunning to lure her. And anyway, at the opening of this book, House of Names, she's pretty content, Clytemnestra, because she has actually managed to murder him when he comes back victorious from the wars. And he's come back with a beautiful woman called Cassandra, and she's thrown Cassandra into the equation and murdered her too. And she's just pretty content that she's done this without, anyone stopping her. And then she goes back a bit over really how she planned this. But this is really the opening page of the book, as Clytemnestra, really having murdered her husband, is filled with glee. I have been acquainted with the smell of death, the sickly, sugary smell that wafted in the wind towards the rooms in this palace. It is easy now for me to feel peaceful and content. I spend my morning looking at the sky and the changing light. The bird song begins to rise as the world fills with its own pleasure, and then as day wanes, the sound too wanes and fades. I watch as the shadows lengthen. So much has slipped away, but the smell of death lingers. Maybe the smell has entered my body and been welcomed there like an old friend come to visit. The smell of fear and panic. The smell is here like the very air is here. It returns in the same way as light in the morning returns. It is my constant companion. It has put life into my eyes, eyes that grew dull with waiting, but are not dull now, eyes that are alive now with brightness. I gave orders that the bodies should remain in the open under the sun a day or two, until the sweetness gave way to stench. And I liked the flies that came, the little bodies perplexed and brave, buzzing after their feast. Upset by the continuing hunger they felt in themselves, a hunger I had come to know too and come to appreciate. We're all hungry now. Food merely whets our appetite. It sharpens our teeth. Meat makes us ravenous for more meat, as death is ravenous for more death. Murder makes us ravenous, fills the soul with satisfaction that is fierce and then luscious enough to create a taste for further satisfaction. The problem I had then, I think the problem of anyone who faces this material now, is what to do about belief and the gods and the sheer number of them. And are you going to put them in on every page of your book? And if the people in your novel believe so much in the gods and the power of the gods, what agency do they have? How can you allow them to have choices and chances? So I decided to, this is just on page 6, get this over with as quickly as I possibly could. I think if you're a Greek scholar, I think this is the most horrifying idea that someone Irish, no connection, could just decide on a whim to do this. But that's what really writing novels is. And sorry, Greek scholars. So this is her plotting and planning what she's going to do as her husband is returning victorious from the wars. I had spies to tell me when he would come back. Men lit each fire that gave the news to further hills, where other men lit fires to alert me. It was the fire that brought the news, not the gods. Among the gods now there is no one who offers me assistance or oversees my actions or knows my mind. There is no one among the gods to whom I appeal. I live alone in the shivering, solitary knowledge that the time of the gods has passed. I'm praying to no gods. I'm alone among those here because I do not pray and will not pray again. Instead, I will speak in ordinary whispers. I will speak in words that come from the world, and those words will be filled with regret for what has been lost. I will make sounds like prayers, but prayers that have no source and no destination, not even a human one, since my daughter is dead and cannot hear. I know, as no one else knows, that the gods are distant. They have other concerns. They care about human desires and antics in the same way that I care about the leaves of a tree. I know the leaves are there. They wither and grow again and wither as people come and live and then are replaced by others like them. There's nothing I can do to help them or prevent their withering. I do not deal with their desires. I wish now to stand here and laugh. Hear me tittering and then howling with mirth at the idea that the gods allowed my husband to win his war, that they inspired every plan he worked out and every move he made, that they knew his cloudy moods in the morning and the strange and silly exhilaration he could exude at night, that they listened to his implorings and discussed them in their godly homes, that they watched the murder of my daughter with approval. When he was alive, he and the men around him believed that the gods followed their fates and cared about them, each of them. But I will say now that they did not. They do not. Our appeal to the gods is the same as the appeal a star makes in the sky above us before it falls. It is a sound we cannot hear, a sound to which, even if we did hear it, we will be fully indifferent. The gods have their own unearthly concerns, unimagined by us. They barely know we are alive. For them, if they were to hear of us, we would be like the mild sound of wind in the trees, a distant, unpersistent, rustling sound. I know that it was not always thus. There was a time when the gods came in the morning to wake us, when they combed our hair and filled our mouths with the sweetness of speech and listened to our desires and tried to fulfill them for us, when they knew our minds, when they could send us signs. Not long ago, within our memories, the crying women could be heard in the night in the time before death came. It was a way of calling the dying home, hastening their flight, softening their wavering journey to the place of rest. My husband was with me in the days before my mother died, and we both heard it, and my mother heard it too, and it comforted her that death was ready to lure her with its cries. That noise has stopped. There is no more crying like the wind. The dead fade in their own time. No one helps them. No one notices except those who have been close to them during their short spell in the world. As they fade from the earth, the gods do not hover over with their haunting, whistling sound. I notice it here, the silence around death. They have departed, the ones who oversaw death. They've departed. They've gone and they will not be back. My husband was lucky with the wind. That was all, and lucky with his men were brave, and lucky that he prevailed. It could easily have been otherwise. He did not need death to sacrifice our daughter to the gods. My nurse was with me from the time I was born. In her last days, we did not believe that she was dying. I sat with her and we talked. If there had been the slightest sound of wailing, we would have heard. There was nothing, no sound to accompany her towards death. There was silence, or the usual noise from the kitchen, or the barking of dogs. And then she died, and she stopped breathing. It was over for her. And I went out and looked at the sky, and all I had then to help me was the leftover language of prayer. What had once been powerful and added meaning to everything was now desolate, strange, with its own sad, brittle power, with its memory locked in its rhythms of a vivid past when our words rose up and found completion. Now our words are trapped in time. They're filled with limits. They are mere distractions. They're as fleeting and monotonous as breath. They keep us alive. And maybe that is something, at least for the moment, for which we should be grateful. There is nothing else. What happens as the novel goes on is, of course, that Orestes, Clytemnestra's son, does return, and egged on by his sister, Electra, he decides he's going to murder his mother. Part of the problem I had was that I couldn't find any other text. I don't really read thrillers, so I don't know if there's any. I couldn't find much about murdering your mother before. I was trying to see had anyone else tried that trick in a novel. And then I started to look at Hamlet. He didn't murder Gertrude, but he could have. There's a little moment in the play where he nearly does. And then I started to look more at Hamlet and realized the problem I was going to have was not the murder, but the aftermath. What do you do to a boy who's just murdered his mother? Like, does he that night, does he feel sorry? Does he feel ashamed? Does he eat his dinner? Does he sleep? Does he lie awake all night? No matter what you do, you're sort of stuck with cliche. So I thought, I don't know what to do with him after he murders her. So I thought, well, I'll just end a section with him murdering her and then turn the page. And since Hamlet, there was a ghost in Hamlet, I thought, well, why don't I bring a ghost into a novel? And so anyway, Orestes murders his mother and she's dead. And then you turn a few pages, blank ones. And then it's her, here she is again, Clytemnestra. But she's making a different sound now than she was making in those early pages of the book where she's so filled with life, with glee, so much energy in her. And in these few pages, when she gets to speak from the dead, there's a different sound. This is Clytemnestra speaking from the dead. Oh, she doesn't remember, and this has come up once before in the book because I put other ghosts in, then I got to like ghosts, that they just don't remember how they died. And she's not looking for revenge or anything. And she was killed on steps on the way down to a sort of sunken garden. There will come a time when the shadows fold in on me. I know that. But I'm awake now, or almost awake. I remember some things. Outlines come to me in the faint sound of voices. What linger most are traces of people, presences, sounds. Mostly I walk among the shades, but sometimes a hint of someone comes close, someone whose name I once knew or whose voice and face were real to me, someone I once loved, perhaps. I'm not sure. There's one remnant that comes and persists, however. It is my mother. Of course, her mother is Leda, of course, who was raped by a swan. It was by the god Zeus in the form of a swan. My mother, at some moment in the distant past, she is helpless, being held down. I can hear cries, her cries, and the shriller cries of a figure above her or lying on her, and then louder cries as the figure flits away, a figure with a beak and wings, with the shape of wings, the wings beating in the air, and my mother lying breathless, whimpering. But I do not know what this means or why it comes to me. I feel that if I remain still, something more will come. It's hard not to wander in these spaces when there is silence. There are presences I wish to encounter, presences that are close but not close enough to touch or be seen. I cannot think of the names. Their names. And I cannot see faces clearly, although there are moments when I have been quiet, when I have made no effort for some time to remember or focus. Moments when a face approaches, the face of someone I have known, but it fades before it becomes anyone I can recognize. I know that there was feeling, and that is the difference between where I am now and the place I was once. There was a time, I know, when I felt rage and I felt sorrow, but now I have lost what leads to rage and sorrow. Maybe the only reason I wander in these spaces has to do with some other feeling, or what is left of it. Maybe that feeling is love, that there is someone whom I love still, or have loved and protected, but I cannot be sure of that. No name will come. Some words come, but not the words I want, which are the names. If I can say the names, I will know then whom I loved, and I will find them or know how to see them. I will lure them into the shadows when the time is right. No one in their world knows how little there is here. It is all blankness, strangeness, silence. Hardly anything moves. There are echoes like distant water flowing under rock, and then sometimes that sound comes nearer, but it is still faint. If I listen too eagerly, it disappears. Maybe there are things that did not come to an end when I was there, and they linger now like words that need to be said, or words that have escaped me and will come, or might come, or must come as I wait here. It will take time. I do not know how much time I have, or how much time there is, but I know that I must fade, that I cannot persist in this state. The fading will be gradual. By the end, I will not know anything. What I am hoping for is one more surge, some hours or even moments when I will go back into the world and settle into it briefly as though I were alive. In the meantime, there is memory, which connects and attaches and withdraws. It is almost something. A vague thought hovers but is never stable. Like a figure with wings, it edges towards what has been or was. I live on the inside of what has substance. I can feel some large set of pressing desires brushing past. All I am left with, though, are the great traces, the clues. This must be what shadow is like, or aftermath. Some lines or shapes that must have made sense at one time, or may still make sense, but seem random now. If only I could follow what their intention was, or whisper to whoever made them. That desire is the closest I have come to pure feeling, and it is not close at all. I will be left here for the hours or days or years I have been allotted, no longer than that. Being perplexed and bewildered replaces truth and knowledge, replaces what is real and tangible. The space I inhabit is like a sad gift that was offered, will soon be replaced. And then a word occurred to me, a word of which I was sure. It was the word dream. Once the word came, I knew what dream was or had been, and I was certain then that I was not dreaming in this nullness, that none of what is happening is dream, it is real, it is actual. And then other words appeared, like stars in the darkening sky. I became desperate to take possession of each one, but I could not hold on to them. They were falling or glittering or moving farther away. It was enough, however, to have seen them, to get some idea of their power, and know that some of them would return and, like the light from a full moon on a dark night, become part of the shadowy stability that was guiding me. I walked in the corridors of that palace where I had once lived. I could almost remember some things that had happened. There was an image of someone in a garden or on steps that led to a garden, staring hard, breathing hard, but then nothing. Just stillness in the garden. And there was not even a garden, there was merely a space. But I was still awake. I was waiting, knowing that there would be change, that it would not always be like this. I was aware how easy it would be, once I was in those corridors again, for one of the guards to notice me if I made a sound or if I moved quickly, so that there would be some disturbance in the air. And then slowly I began to understand why I was here and who I was looking for. His name did not come to me, and I was not able to picture his face, but I felt that he was close. I could imagine the guard who had seen me or who had noticed my presence consulting one of the other guards, and then both of them approaching him, the one I am searching for, or his friend who looks after him. My husband is dead, and my daughter. They have become pure shade. My other daughter is here, but the one I am searching for is my son. I'm awake. The words I knew are sleeping. Sometimes they turn in the night or make some sound in their vast dreaming, and then they wake too. Often, if only for a second, they open their eyes and watch me. I hold their gaze so that they might remember me as they fall back into sleep. I study them then in their inert state. I'm alert to any movement they make. I can hear their dark groanings in the night, intermittent against their breathing. I can see them reach their arms towards me to be lifted. I can tell the difference between night and day now. I know the silence that descends on the gardens and the corridors at night, a silence broken only by the soft movements of the guards or of cats. This is my realm, where I'm free to wander. As I come from the garden, I'm aware that the guards can feel a movement in the air. It would just take one more thing to let them know that I'm with them, a sound, a darting gesture. When the time came, I knew that I would hear his name, my son's name, enough to whisper it, like someone imploring. It would come to me when I needed it. Orestes, I whispered on one of those nights, and then I withdrew into the shadows. Orestes, I repeated, letting my voice echo down the corridor. I saw two of the guards running back and forth, and then summoning the other one, my son's friend, who strutted up and down, checking doorways and corners. I waited until he had gone, and then I whispered to one of the guards, "Tell Orestes that I'm his mother. He must come alone into the corridor. He must be alone." The guard made as though to run, but then stopped himself. "Speak again," he said quietly, his head bowed. "Tell Orestes to come alone," I said. "Now?" he asked. "Soon. Orestes must come soon." "Do you mean to cause him harm?" "No, I do not mean to cause him harm." Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks to you both. The readings were so different. I'm going to ask you each separate questions. I've been in their position before, and somebody asks a kind of general question to each writer, and it can be challenging. Colm, I'll start with you, since you read last, and then move to Ottessa. The first part that you read, when she takes care of the problem of the question among Greek scholars of the gods, it's very beautiful what she says about them regarding us like she regards the leaves. There's something about the space in which she speaks that reminds me in certain ways of this very beautiful book that Colm wrote called The Testament of Mary, about the mother of Jesus. And what's similar to me is somehow the space of address. It's incredibly private, but it's also public. Like you're giving these women a radical speech act to make a claim and say things about their own lives and the world. But it's very mysterious. It's not like other fiction. It kind of reminds me of a theatrical space. And I just want to know how you create that and where you think it comes from.
It comes from the theatre that I was aware when I was writing The Testament of Mary that if I was lucky, some actress would perform it for me. And
the most famous living actress, Fiona Shaw, performed it.
Well, eventually Fiona Shaw did it, but in Ireland, Marie Mullen did it first, who's one of the best-known actresses in Ireland. So that I was aware this was to be spoken out loud, but also when I was writing, I was not bothered with, how, for example, I had to shorten it significantly and work significantly with the directors and a dramaturg just to get it down to a space where it could work on the stage. So I wasn't it wasn't written first in that way. And then when I had worked so closely with both of the actresses that when I came to writing that opening sequence that I just read there, I had been talking again to Fiona Shaw, and we had been discussing the various ways, the various parts for women that come from the Greek theatre, and the sense of out of powerlessness comes texture of speech that when, for example, in Antigone, when Creon speaks, it can sound like legislation. It's dry. But the minute Antigone appears, when she speaks, her voice has all this flavor, this texture, and this sense of command, which she needs to have on the stage. So I was working at that sort of energy, and giving that sort of staccato energy to the page, which I was also getting from figures in poetry such as Sylvia Plath had done, and most particularly with the American poet Louise Glick had done, with using individual sentences as chiseled things, almost as made of metal, that you put down on the page as a single sentence that is declaratory and honored and not adorned. And so I was working in that sort of way.
So just to follow up quickly, you think the women are more exciting when they speak in Greek tragedy?
Oh, well, except for Oedipus.
This question is for Ottessa. I have a feeling maybe you've been asked this a lot, and if you have, my apologies, but for me, it forms as a genuine curiosity. My students read your story, The Weirdos, and you read today from Malibu, and both stories have characters in them who have qualities that seem somewhat repulsive. And it leads me to ponder something about the nature of pity and wonder, like, what happens for the writer when you start to, in this case, it's written in the first person, so you are embodying that character. And yet, in certain ways, he is so tangibly outside of you. For instance, there's no stubble on the back of your hands tonight. And I just wonder how you keep him close and hold him away at the same time, or is that a balancing act that you're conscious of?
Well, I guess there's two ways to look at the question, because one of them is in the process of writing, how do I do that? How do I hold him close and yet not, and yet have the distance of authority as the writer? That doesn't seem hard, because basically he's a perversion of me, and I can be him and use my own mind to judge him, and then predict what the reader will judge and how and whether, and to try to control the effect on the reader. In looking at the story as at a distance, how did I do that? Well, it's in his voice.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's it.
So, like, you give him qualities that will seem repulsive to the reader, but to you, you sort of hold them close.
I mean,
if that makes sense.
It's a really different experience writing the story and then reading it out loud in a church or whatever, that's a chapel, where I can feel that I'm making you uncomfortable. Like, it's palpable in the room. I'm like, should I not read the next line? There were a couple of lines I skipped because I was like, this feels heavy. Yeah.
Give it to us now.
Oh, I don't know. It was just like, there was like a line at the end of a paragraph, and it just felt like, okay, I've hit them too much with this point. Now I'm belaboring it. They're just going to start thinking this is a one-note kind of deal. So I got insecure. It's like, no, I'm not going to do that. But it's like, when I'm writing, I'm not disgusted. It's kind of like, I'm just going to say something else disgusting. It's like when you go to the toilet, you're not disgusted. But if somebody else does, ew, right? So if it's coming from my imagination, I'm totally comfortable with it. But if I show it to you, it's like that gets creepy.
Yeah. Do people have questions? This is a very special occasion to have these two wonderful writers with us. If you want to ask them anything. And particularly if there's questions from that middle part of the right side of the room, that would be wonderful. There's somebody in the back with a microphone. Yes, there's a hand there. And that hand belongs to someone who's going to get a good grade in my class.
Maybe wait till you hear the question. I have a question for Ottessa. because I was curious during your reading when you talk about the fact that you made us uncomfortable. I was really interested in the fact that you configure the body as something uncomfortable and maybe inherently slightly grotesque within the characters of your work. And I was wondering where that interest for you lies, and if it perhaps does something for you through the work of being grotesque that other works don't do.
I like the way you asked that question, A+. I mean, I spent maybe 5 or 6 years writing these stories, 4 or 5, and it was a period in my life where I would say my primary emotion was disgust, whether it was on a tangible level, like disgust with things, objects, or bodies owned by people I didn't like, or whatever. It was a part of my life where I was just really grossed out by the world and by myself too. And I think that's why so much of the emotional weight of the stories lies in that area. I mean, this story in particular is pretty explicitly about that, as pertains to the body. And I think what I got from it was a way to write about mortality. I mean, I think, the principle of disgust exists to protect us from disease, i.e. death. So there was something about facing it really straightforwardly and kind of milking it for all I could get from it, where I was kind of saying to myself, I'm not afraid to die. And that's where the power in the stories came from, and why I feel unashamed. I mean, I think a lot of times when people ask the question that Rachel asked me, there's a hint of why are you so disgusting, or what's wrong with you?
I didn't mean that.
But no, I'm saying.
I mean, you seem perfectly disgusting to me. No, just kidding. She's so not disgusting. Yeah.
No, I mean, so I don't feel like I've done anything bad because, because whatever. I mean, why should I be ashamed of anything? But B, there's so much. I mean, the whole point of writing these things is to get them out there so that we don't have to be ashamed of them. So having a character talking about his pimples seems perfectly reasonable when there are people everywhere who are obsessed with their pimples. They're just not talking about them. So I was like, well, let's just see what happens narratively if I have the narrator airing all of these secrets. And he says really up front, these were my secrets. They're pretty superficial secrets. Anyway, I think I've gotten away from your question, but I hope I answered it.
This one is for Colm, and I guess when you were reading that second passage about the mother as a ghost, I guess I was wondering how did you have to pull, or did you intentionally try to pull from mythology to write that shade space that she describes, or was that just totally something from your brain?
I think the first thing about it is that you can only write it once, so that you've got to be very careful when you set about writing it to know that this is not going to, that you have to make this seem not only seem real to the reader, but actually to yourself, as though somebody is in real time attempting to grapple with the idea that they might or might not get these words, these names, and you write it down knowing, okay, I can change individual words, I can make cuts and additions, but the overall tone of it, I won't try this again. This is not a draft of anything. This is almost not a literary text. This is a voice speaking in real time. And therefore, I'm working from nothing. I mean, absolutely nothing, other than trying to imagine what else the voice might know or feel or say, and how it might come. And I mean, it becomes personal because you actually feel, I think there might be someone in the room, you know, but there isn't. But just if there was, what would she sound like now as she would try and speak? How long would she stay for? What word? What would she not know? And so I'm working without any connection to a Greek text or a mythological origin. I'm working entirely personally. I'm working from very deep need and from something that really matters to me, which is the idea of loss and the idea of how tentative that loss is when you remember so much about somebody, and that idea of the connection between the living and the dead in that sort of way. So it's very much a middle-aged man attempting to work out some way or other of how the older generation might sound if they would possibly come anywhere near, in the night or even in the day, and try and write that down.
I think there's a line where you say that the dead are pure shade, and it's so beautiful, and it made a lot of sense to me in terms of thinking about presence of absence, because shade is a tangible thing.
I mean, it's in that last section of James Joyce's story, The Dead, that word shade gets used as he's there alone, as his wife is sort of sleeping, as the party's over, attempts to, in prose, I think much richer than mine. I'm trying to keep mine really spare, but Gabriel in that story is visited that night by the shades. And the prose has to deal with that. And it's a different sort of prose because it's closer sometimes to the language of prayer. The problem I have to do is just keep that down, keep that incantatory thing down a bit, just reduce it as much as I can. So it sounds like a lost voice or a reduced tone rather than a rich one.
Hi, I'm from an Irish Catholic Chicago family, and I really related to Nora Webster and then Brooklyn, and I just wondered how you write women so well.
Oh dear.
It's not a compared to what the students are asking,
simple.
it's just...
It's just simple that those two books, Brooklyn and Nora Webster, were written in the few years after my mother and her two sisters had died. And in a way it was, I was the little boy in the room listening to every word they said until they would put me out eventually, because they knew that how much I was, they found out eventually that they had a nightmare in the house, a little boy who remembered every single thing an adult ever said.
Wow.
And whereas the men downstairs were pretty boring. They were talking about sport. It just couldn't have been more boring. Upstairs, the women would be really talking about something very interesting, like a coat that Auntie Harriet nearly bought in Dublin, And Auntie Maeve would be, and it would just, nothing that wouldn't be of huge interest. And later on, I would be able to repeat the whole thing to anyone who came. Auntie Harriet nearly bought a green coat with a button. And then it was all over. The sweet treat was over. And in those years, I just imagined that one of them had gone to Brooklyn. She didn't go, but she did work in that exact office. And, some of the things were exactly, the town is named. And the novel Nora Webster was, down to sometimes the tiniest detail, was about myself and my younger brother being in the house of my mother in the years after my father died. And me trying to imagine what was going on with her, because it comes up in the book where she says eventually, or she thinks, he has been noticing me more than I've been noticing him. And that was sort of true. And so I just waited all the years. But I didn't wait deliberately. I just, when they were gone, I could write those books because I had really remembered all of that. That's how that happened. The golden rule is if you keep children out of the room.
I have a question for Ottessa about humor. Well, first, there's wonderful humor in all the stories in your collection, and I was wondering if you feel like you've become a funnier writer, or if the short story is a space that presents itself for humor. Like, do you know how funny you are? I could see when you were reading, you kind of knew when it was funny. So I just wanted to know how you experience your own humor, because I want to be funny, but it's I think it's the hardest thing in fiction, in a way, and I congratulate myself excessively if I'm funny, and it seems to come somewhat easily to you. But in different forms that you work, it's less or more manifest.
Well, my answer is really disappointing, and is that I write in utter seriousness.
No, that's fascinating, really.
I take myself way too seriously when I'm writing. So whatever happens ends up being totally ridiculous. I mean, there are some lines in that story that I think were mostly delivered by the uncle, who is a funny character.
It's a very funny exchange they have with the business-like discussion of the cutting of the grass.
I mean, when I was writing that, I was like, this is a sincere exchange. But then I reread it, and it was absurdist, sort of. And that's just how I work. If I'm trying to be funny, then it's always stupid. And I don't know. I don't know if I'm a funny person in real life. I think I am. Am I? I mean, so much of it is timing. And it's really easy to be, it's so much easier to be funny in dialogue.
Yeah. But even in gesture, there's humor, like when he lights the cigarette, but we've already been told what the function of the cigarette is. And so we know that this sort of ritual meeting between these two people who are basically best friends as uncle and nephew, right? And so it's like they're kind of carrying out this scene that has other comic elements besides dialogue to it.
Yeah, I mean, it comes in, doesn't it, when in a tone that you're wrong-footing the reader sometimes, where I think there's no joke in the line, obviously, but there's a complete irony in the way the piece of dialogue is done. Now, well, I suppose the question is that a first draft? I mean, does that come easily to you, or do you go over and over thinking, I need to take one thing out of that line to make it funny, or does it come on your ear automatically?
It is an ear. I mean, it is about the listening to it. And in editing, you have to listen to it, and when there's too much or not quite right, you fix it. Because you can hear what it's supposed to be. And if it's not quite there yet, you make it that. You know what I mean? But it is about listening. I don't know how it's done. But I don't think that I'm only funny in stories. God, I hope not. I mean, in my novels. I mean, I think that there's some humor in my novels.
Oh, most
too.
definitely, yeah. Definitely. But somehow the stories have they have a sort of comic density to them, I find.
Well, they're structured in a way that makes that easy. And also that collection was so, there are some pretty grave situations, but like in that story, Malibu, all that happens is the guy's trying to get a job, and then he goes on a blind date. Like, that's the whole story.
But he goes to Lone Pine to go on a blind date, which is in the high desert.
He goes quite a ways. Well, he's desperate.
So you've just done it there, the way you said it's desperate. I mean, that could be the saddest line ever said, but you just did something else with it entirely. I wish I knew how to do that.
I think you do.
Hi. Ottessa, you said there was a line that you skipped over during your reading. How do you make choices like that while reading your work aloud, and how do you prep for it? And what advice do you have for reading your work out loud in general?
I don't think that you can really prep for it, because you're constantly taking the temperature of the room. I mean, I think you should. I mean, if people aren't laughing when you think it's funny, then something is wrong. And like, maybe phone it in a little. Don't try to tempt the cat out of its cage or whatever, because it's cozy and sleeping and people just aren't listening. And don't take it personally. And about skipping lines, I think if reading a line makes you cringe, maybe don't read it. Like if you're looking at it and you're like, I don't feel like reading that, don't do it. And pick things that you like reading aloud. I mean, the worst thing is to have to read a story that you're sick of or, something you don't enjoy reading out loud. And certain things lend themselves more to being read aloud than being read in silence.
Hello, this question is for Ottessa. Listening to you read, your narrator came across to me as someone seeking connection with another person. I mean, he says nothing excites him, but he's going on this random blind date. I wonder if that's something you're thinking of when you're writing these characters, or is that some characteristic of them and their personalities?
I think it's a characteristic of all personalities to want to connect and want some kind of reflection or validation for one's own existence and value as a person. And in that character, he's neurotic to a point where he sees himself only from the outside. I mean, I think he's really obsessed with how he is perceived from the outside. So his quest for relating. I mean, the story is also about his sort of brushing his uncle off, like this one person in his world who's his family, who cares for him somewhat. And if you read the whole story, you'll see that there's this moment where he realizes he's thrown away like the real connection in pursuit of this delusion of finding true romance in Lone Pine. And he's been cruel to the person who loves him in search of somebody who's just going to reflect that he's like a hot guy or something like that. And it's really sad. So I think that's the way that I saw that character. It's not a complex character in that sense. I mean, he wanted something and he didn't realize that he sort of already had it, which was the connection to another person.
Ottessa, I was curious if you could talk a little about your differing experience within writing characters in novels and then writing a character that, like one that we just heard, who's so incredibly nuanced, but who you created in a much shorter space, and in conjunction with really only a few other characters. Kind of how is that different for you?
Well, when I have a character in a novel, like a protagonist in a novel, I think a lot about the origination of characteristic. And in a short story, I just accept these are the character's characteristics, and I don't have to sort of psychoanalyze in terms of her or his personal history. But in a novel, let's say I had a character who was always impatient about getting the mail, right? Like, let's say like she was always hoping something was going to come in the mail because she was bored and lonely, even if it was the AT&T bill. She couldn't wait for the mail. It's like, well, what in her life has made her like that? And in a novel, there's room and sort of not just opportunity, but the responsibility to explore those things. Maybe not literally like, well, when she was 5, her mother, ... But you can have a characteristic and really explore it. Whereas in a short story, in my short stories, I feel like I sort of take them as they're delivered and push them through the conveyor of the narrator, if that makes any sense.
Colm, can you say something about the difference between how you treat characters in stories and novels, since you've written many of both?
Yeah, I think it's that same idea of history where you really can just catch a moment in a story as a key moment, and it doesn't really matter. I mean, I think maybe you need to know a great deal, but the reader doesn't maybe need to know as much as you know. Don't put it in, leave it out. Just get the moment and let the moment do all the work. With the novel, even if you're not using a lot of backstory, you really are putting a character in time over time, and something does have to change in the character, or at least emerge. An energy has to be released from the character that may not be there at the beginning, or indeed an energy may be just, the character may be put down in some way. With a story, that energy doesn't have to be released, it merely has to be revealed. And just for a second. But nothing has to change, just something has to be revealed. So I think that would be the difference. But the problem is, it's really hard to write a story. You just write a novel. You just say, well, you know, in 1946 there were 5 people, and then over the next decade there were 4 of them. You know, and I'm going to show you what happened in that decade. With a story, how do you start a story? Because you got to give a huge amount of information really fast. But if you put all that information in, what year it was, what everyone looked like, who said what to who, when, it really goes, well, yeah, well, you know, but by the time you get to the story part, you've lost your rhythm, you've lost, so it's a very delicate form. It requires, I think, it's closer to a poem or a melody, just getting a melody, than a novel is.
The part about Clytemnestra as a ghost has a sort of autonomous shine to it, I must say. I think it is something that could stand alone.
Yeah, it might have been better just to have published that and just left the rest of the book out.
It's an incredible book. These are both wonderful writers, and I think we're going to close because I've gotten the sign. And they will both be happy to sign copies of your books in the back if you so wish. And thanks, Ottessa. Thanks, Colm. Thanks, everyone, for coming.